Okay, our lesson today is Introduction to Prisms. And our goal for today's lesson is to be able to define and recognize a prism. So for warm-up, we've done this before. Your target number is 160 and you're using these 6 numbers. You can only use them once and you can use any of the 4 operations to try to get to 160. So spend max 5 minutes on this task and then move on to the APK. All right, so for APK, you're just having to think to yourself about what the term prism would mean. You've definitely come across it before, probably in primary school. What does it look like? Try to draw one up, and if you can name a few before we look through some of them over the next few slides. All right, so there are prisms in the real world. So these are some examples. Oops, too quick. There we go. So we've got that Toblerone, which is a type of prism. We've got the buildings, boxes, tissue boxes. They're all prisms, and we're going to look at all the different types of prisms and what names they have. So a prism is basically a solid 3D object. It's got identical ends. So both ends should be the same. It's got flat faces. So each of the faces should be flat. You can't have any curved faces or surfaces. And the same cross-sectional faces all along its length. So it doesn't matter where you cut along the length. Each time the cross-section is going to look exactly the same. So a base of the prism is the ends of a prism. The ends of a prism are what you refer to as a base. So if they ask what is the base of this prism, you're looking at the ends of the prism to identify what shape that is. So for example, here it is triangle shaped. The base is triangle shaped because this end is identical to this end here, the triangle here. And so therefore the base of this prism is a triangle. There we go, they're the bases. The length of the prism is the distance between those two bases. So the two parallel lines, so that would be the length of the prism. Because that's the base and the other side, that's the base as well. So this is the length of the prism. So that's going to obviously be exactly the same as this length here and also this length across here. So it doesn't matter which one of those you pick as the length, they're going to all be equal. In this case here, we can say this is the base and that side, the rectangle is the base. So therefore the length can be this one here or this one here or even this one here to work out the length of the prism. Now, is a cylinder a prism? So in a cylinder, we know that the opposite sides, the bases, are the same. We've got a circle as our base. But the other criteria that we wanted to tick off to say something is a prism is, remember, it's got to have flat faces. So that's not a flat surface. So therefore, a cylinder is not considered a prism. Whereas see how every surface here, that's flat, that's flat, that's flat, that's flat. So in a prism, all the surfaces have to be flat. So there's a few things you need to tick off to say whether something is a prism. And unfortunately, you cannot classify a cylinder as a prism. A prism is a polyhedron, which means all faces are flat. So no curved sides. And in a cylinder, you cannot classify it as a prism because it has curved sides. So have a quick look through this and see whether you could identify which ones would be a prism. So obviously anything with a curved surface would not be a prism. And also you want to make sure that the opposite ends have the same base. So in this case here, you wouldn't classify that as a prism. It's a pyramid because the opposite sides are not the same. They don't have the same base, so it doesn't have the same cross section. If I was to cut across here, it's not going to be exactly the same as if I was to make a cut across here. Okay, so that's also not, because it's got a curved surface. So have a look through each one and see if you can identify which ones are prisms and which ones aren't. And so here you're trying to identify which ones are. So maybe pause the video at this point, try and give them names based on the bases that you see. So the names that are given to these are based on the base. So here the triangle base, there we go, that's the base, that's the base, that's the base. So try and name these, pause the video at this point before I show you the answers. All right, so the first one is a triangular prism. The next one is a rectangular prism, and again a rectangular prism. Then we've got pentagonal prism, hexagonal prism, and octagonal prism. So that's based on the shapes. So we've got octagon, hexagon, and pentagon as our bases here. And here, of course, it's a rectangle and a rectangle. So if you're asked to identify the cross-sectional shape, then basically the cross-section means what does the base look like. Every time I make a cut, my base is going to be the same, and in this case the cross-sectional shape would be a hexagon. So that's the what it's referring to when it says cross-sectional shape. All right, so I'll provide you the worksheet where you might need to do some of the drawings for each of these prisms, and then a separate worksheet for you to complete a table with a lot of information about prisms.